I'm Sarah Pepin. I'm Plans Program Assistant. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. This training is presented through a funding from TSLAC and the IMLS Commission. So we're very, very grateful for that grant to be able to do this. I have a post survey I'll put in the chat at the end. It's also going to go out with the recording. So please fill that out. That helps us be able to kind of track our numbers and make sure that we're providing good training for you guys, and gives us some feedback too. They're very, very short. Shouldn't take long to fill out. But right now we have Kimberly Silk with us. She's up in Canada, so zooming in. I guess not Zoom, but she's going to be presenting on demonstrating library value. So thank you very much for being here, all of you. And Kim, go ahead and take it away.
Oh, thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. From snowy Canada, I'm in Toronto, Canada. We had our first snow yesterday, and so we're all just adjusting to that reality. So I know that most of you are in Texas, so I lived in Austin in the spring earlier this year, and what a beautiful part of North America that is, and I look forward to coming back and visiting again soon, particularly during the winter. Today's presentation is all about demonstrating library value. It's quite a high-level overview presentation with just an hour to talk about it, and also wanting to make sure that there is time for questions and maybe some discussion at the end. I'll show you what I have been prepared for you today. So the agenda I've put together next to this beautiful Carnegie Library in Jefferson is talking about some definitions of library value, a timeline, a bit of a short history of library value studies, predominantly in North America. Then I'm going to talk about some methodologies that we use to measure library value, talking about some economic and social value frameworks that I've worked with that might be interesting to you, and then finally some resources as next steps in thinking forward. So the first thing I wanted to do was just provide some definitions about economic value versus social value or social impact. Terminology like social value, social impact, economic impact. Value and impact tend to be used fairly interchangeably. When we're thinking about economic impact, it's really looking at whatever project or program or intervention or an event or the existence of an organization like a library. Taking a look at that thing and estimate how much money in a dollar value the operating of that organization puts into the economy. And the amount of money that goes into the local economy, the money that goes into the economy can be at the local level, within the community that organization serves, but it can be more widely, of course. It can be statewide, it could be national, it might even be international, depending upon the activities that are happening in that organization. So what an economic impact study really does is it looks at all of the things that, for instance, a library does. So that would be everything from collections that are circulating, not just books, but lots of other things too, programs that are happening, different services that are offered, different partnerships that are in place, different events that are happening, how technology is used, how library space is used, bookmobiles, pop-up libraries, all the activities that a library does. And we assign a financial value to it. We assign a dollar value to those things. And that is how we calculate over, usually within a given year, how much value in financial terms is contributed back into the economy as a result of those. And we'll get a bit deeper into that in a second. Social impact is really looking at the intended and unintended social consequences of planned activities. So again, if we're thinking in terms of libraries and we think about the programs that have been developed in order to serve a particular part of our community, to address literacy, for instance, to improve employment rates in order to help people gain new skills, have access to different sorts of learning. With social impact, we take a look at all those activities and we see if any kind of social change has been brought about as a result of those activities. So when we're talking about library value studies, lots of times we think about the economic impact studies because those are the ones that have been done most often. You will see that, oh gosh, in the past 40 years or so, the number of impact studies, predominantly economic impact studies that have been done, have been really growing since the 2000s, and that's no accident. Certainly with the economic downturn that we had in 2008, there was more and more pressure on cultural organizations, well, on all organizations, frankly, to be to demonstrate what their value was, particularly those who are publicly funded. Citizens, elected officials, people want to know where that money is going. And so there's an increased pressure for us to demonstrate how it is that we are spending that money and the value that is brought about into the economy as a result. So looking at the timeline that I have here, you'll see that the earliest study that I have come across was back in 1972. And it was an economic analysis, of course. Into the 1980s and 1990s, there was a lot of studies that were happening in colleges and universities looking at student achievement and student outcomes from an academic library perspective. And there started to be some interesting work on the impact of healthcare libraries on patient care within hospital types of environments. I have found when it comes to public institutions, Australia and New Zealand and countries in Scandinavia really take the lead in lots of ways in trying new things, and economic impact studies is one of those things that they brought about. And I saw when I was doing research in this area, when I started doing research in this area more than 10 years ago, I really saw that there was a lot of impact studies coming out of Australia, a couple in New Zealand, several in Finland, a couple in England, and those have continued to build. And it's also in Australia that I've seen more economic and social value studies coming about. So not just the economic, but trying to bring in the social value aspect as well. So by the 2000s, had lots of studies happening throughout North America. Here in Canada, there was a seminal study that was done on the economic value of Toronto Public Library, and that was a study that really got a lot of other Canadian libraries doing economic impact studies. And then, you know, since then, the last 10 years, this is just a very short list of studies that are happening, but they're happening at the country level, they're happening at the regional level, state, and also city and and very, very local level as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about economic impact methodologies, and not to get anybody like freaked out or anything. This stuff is really, really simple. There are two different approaches generally that you can take when you're doing an economic impact study. The first one is one that I'm most familiar with and I see most often with library value studies, and that's called a cost-benefit analysis, or we often call it a CBA. It's also known as an input-output model. So basically the way that it works is we are assigning a financial value to all the things that the library does. So we can estimate what circulation is worth by assigning a dollar value to the items that are circulated. We can identify what a program is worth by assigning a dollar value to those things. And when we're doing these library studies, the dollar values that we are assigning are relevant and contextually accurate to the location of that library. So for instance, if it were a library in a large city, those costs are not going, the monetary values aren't going to be the same as if it's in a smaller community. Smaller communities, everything costs more because things have to travel further in order to get there, and as you well know. So what we're doing is assigning a monetary value to all the things that the library does. We add it all up. We divide by the amount that it costs for the library to operate, so an operating budget for a year, and the number we come out with is a percentage, or what's known as a return on investment. Most of the time, public libraries punch way above their weight. Generally speaking, for every dollar that is invested in public libraries, you're getting a return of between $3 and $5. So to put that into context, the way I always think about it is that if my retirement investments were getting a return like that, I'd be pretty happy. It's just to demonstrate that libraries are very, very efficient and they generate a lot of economic value. The other model is called contingent valuation. So contingent valuation is a bit more of a qualitative approach to thinking about the value of the library, because what we generally do is we use a survey or sometimes a focus group, and we ask people in the community, if the library wasn't there, what would you be willing to pay? So this willing to pay question is what's key to contingent value. And we assign a value to library activities by asking people, what would you be willing to pay? So that's generally the difference between contingent value. What would you be willing to pay? What value would you, the community member, put on this library program, service, whatever it might be, versus the cost-benefit analysis, which is very quantitative, where we're assigning market values to library activities. To go a little bit deeper into the CBA, the three calculations that we pay attention to. Our first is the direct spending. So this is the money that the library is spending to operate over the course of a year. So this is the operating budget for a library. And then we add the direct benefits. So when I mentioned that we're assigning a dollar value to all the things that a library does, whether that's circulation or a program, all those direct benefits, once we add them all up, that's the direct benefit that the library is giving to the community, back into the economy. But there's also something called direct benefits, or indirect benefits, I'm sorry. The indirect benefits are an interesting economic calculation that acknowledges that when we spend money in the economy, that money gets respent in the economy. So for instance, when I am doing some teaching work for the University of Texas at Austin, I am teaching, and the university pays me a contract for the contract, a dollar amount. And, you know, my paycheck comes in through direct deposit at the end of the month, and that money goes into my bank account, and then I spend that money to pay for my mortgage or my rent, to buy groceries, in order to buy dog food, and maybe I really love fountain pens, so maybe I'll buy a fountain pen. And so when I spend that money in the economy, it then also gets respent. So this cycle of respending is known as a multiplier. And multipliers are this calculation that is provided here in Canada. Statistics Canada provides it to us. In the United States, we would probably get it from Department of Economics. And it tends to be specific to industry and less specific to geography. Generally speaking, in the library studies that I've researched across North America, they're using a multiplier of between 1.4 and 2.0. And so what all of that means, and I'm sorry it sounds so complex, is that when we add up the direct spending, the budget for the library, when we add up all of the amount of the direct benefits of all the things that the library does, and the value of that goes back into the community, plus the respend of that, those three things together add up to be economic impact. When we're looking at the return on investment, as I said before, the return on investment is how much is going into the economy divided by how much is spent in order to run it. So that would be the budget. Here's an example that will hopefully clarify it for a little bit better. Back in 2017, TSLAC did a study of Texas public libraries and the economic benefits. And they looked at the year 2015 for all of their calculations. And when they added up the value of the educational programs and the wireless internet access, the books and digital media that circulated, as well as use of research databases, assigning a dollar value to all of those activities, when they added it all up, was conservatively estimated to be over $1.65 billion. So you can see that when you are looking at how libraries are contributing to the economy, it's really clear that the contribution is very, very positive. If you're trying to figure out, well, what does that mean in the context of, you know, other states or other parts of the country, you'll see in this chart that by comparison in Minnesota, the return on the dollar was $4.62, very close to what Texas is, which is $4.64. And you'll see that in other counties, it's really between, you know, $3 and $6 per dollar spent. This is very consistent range. Library systems, whether we're looking at a state level or a county level or a city level, you'll see there in Toronto, it's the study that I mentioned before, our ROI was $4.63. It's all very consistent. So we know that public libraries punch above their weight. There's no doubt about that. We know that these economic benefit studies are very useful because it shows how a publicly funded institution like the library is contributing to the community and to the economy. It's speaking in quantitative, in a quantitative way, which can be a really good method of communicating to people who understand numbers and find comfort in numbers. But the trouble is that the economic impact, the economic value study doesn't tell the whole story, because there's a whole lot of social value that is part of the library's story as well. And we need to, as good as we've become at doing economic value studies, we need to become as good at doing social value studies. And so I'm going to show you some approaches to that. So one of the first methods in the work that I do that is a way of showing social value is connecting the programs and services and partnerships that the library is involved in, and connecting those to the goals for the local government, for whether it's the municipality or a county, and also connecting library activities to ways to improve our community, to make our community a better place to live. There's lots and lots of examples for how libraries are contributing to the social wonderfulness of our communities. The example that I've put in the slides today talks about how the library contributes to education and lifelong learning for people of all ages in the community. And so for a community, most communities are experiencing some sort of unemployment at different levels. And the library is contributing to improving those conditions by providing learning that is on site, by learning that is done remotely. So there might be LinkedIn learning, any number of databases and e-resources that are available to improve our skills. Learning a new language, learning English as a second language, for instance. Finding ways for us to increase our skill sets and increase our knowledge about different things, so that we, should we want to go and get a new job or a different job, or improve our employment standing in some way. The library clearly, through the programs and the services that it offers, is contributing to this. It may seem obvious, but the trouble is that it's not going to be obvious all the time to our stakeholders and our decision makers. It's really important for us to be brutally transparent and clear about the connection between how the library is serving the community and how serving that community is helping to achieve local government goals. Lots of smaller centers don't have strategic plans per se. I mean, bigger cities do, of course. But even if your local government doesn't have a strategic plan that explicitly says we have this goal and this goal and this goal, anyone who lives in that community is going to know what the challenges are and what the opportunities are. So it could be, reducing unemployment rates. It could be reducing precarious housing and homelessness. It could be increasing literacy rates. It could be many, many, many different things. I can guarantee you that in your library, there are programs going on, there are collections that are present, there are services and partnerships that are in place They are there because you have designed them in order to meet a community need. When it comes to social value studies, it's simply taking the time to be very, very explicit about the connection between the library programs and services and partnerships, and how that is improving a condition in the community that needs to be improved. The second method is very similar, but it's thinking at sort of a more global level. So many of you might be familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It is the UN SDGs, as we call them, were developed in 2015, and it was really a global consultation that occurred in order to come up with these 17 goals. And you'll see that these goals are pretty ambitious. Eliminating poverty, for instance, pretty ambitious goal. All 17 of them tend to be what sometimes we call wicked audacious goals, or WAGs. And they are calls to action to solve great big problems. But as great and big and global as these problems are, they are also present for most of us in the communities that we live in. Poverty is a universal trouble. And there are lots of libraries that are contributing to alleviating poverty by partnering with food banks, having food hampers, or breakfast programs, different mini, what are we calling at home? We call them we call them food closets, where we'll have, something like maybe just like an IKEA bookshelf set up in the library, perhaps a fridge. And if members of the community feel that they need something, then they can come and pick something up. And particularly for kids who may not have gotten the meals that they needed that day, there's always going to be something for them, even if it's just a snack in the library. That is contributing to zero hunger, which is goal number 2. Decent work and economic growth. My earlier example of how libraries are contributing to building skills and learning new skills, learning new languages, and improving one's knowledge and experience doing things, that contributes to decent work and economic growth. Climate action. There are so many great programs in libraries where they have seed exchanges, and they might have community gardens just outside the library. They are helping people learn about growing their own food, learning about how our weather conditions are changing over time, and how learning to grow our own food and learning how to work with the land and the climate that we have, and acknowledging that it's changing. Those programs are contributing to inspiring climate action as people learn more and more about the environment and how it's changing. It is likely inspiring them to pay attention to that and to be part of taking action in favor of preserving our environment. It also contributes to sustainable cities, and community sustainability is one of the UN SDGs. Affordable and clean energy, again. There's, I know of in Canada, having green roofs on our libraries is a really popular thing to do. And I know certainly in Austin, the Austin Public Library has an incredible green roof at the top there. So just as libraries are putting together programs and services and all the things that you guys are doing anyway, because you've put those together, because you're serving your community, you are also contributing to achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The American Library Association has partnered with the International Federation of Library Associations, known as IFLA, to put together a lot of neat posters and templates and examples of how you can show how your library is contributing to the SDGs. And I've got some examples on the slide here. If you have a story time about climate change, you're creating informed citizens who will be interested in protecting their planet. Summer reading programs are bringing literacy skills to those that may not be reading and inspiring, hopefully, a love of reading and lifelong learning. So that would be SDG number 4, quality education. Career development programs, I've already discussed. You are supporting economic growth and decent work for all. When you're providing spaces for communities to gather, and in so many smaller communities, there really aren't that many places that people can just go and gather without maybe feeling pressured to buy something. That is providing that space for communities to gather. You really are building a sustainable community in terms of being a civically sustainable community. So these are just a few examples, and there are so many more out there that you could take advantage of. And these are tools that you can use in order to think about how to demonstrate the social value of the library. The other thing that I want to say, and this is my second to last slide, so we're going to have some time for Q&A, is that we have to develop the skills to use data, both qualitative data and quantitative data, in order to demonstrate the value that the library brings to our communities. And we want to use economic and social approaches to demonstrating that value. Just the economic piece by itself, it's missing part of the story. And even the social piece, without talking about numbers, it's incomplete too. We need to use them both together in order to demonstrate how we really make a difference. And in the diagram that I have here, it's a way of showing that we need to pay attention to who our stakeholders are. And our stakeholders really are the members of our community that contribute tax money to our local government. And that local government, our elected officials, have to make tough decisions on how that money should be spent. We're competing with a lot of other local services. And competing is, to me, is a little bit negative. And what I encourage is to think about partnerships as much as we can. We have a pie that represents the government budget, and we want to be able to be using that money as efficiently as we can. And we want to make sure that, of course, first responders and emergency services have what they need in order to keep us safe. And the library is an important part of that pie, where we are helping to support the community in terms of economic health, good jobs, lots of access to literacy and learning, and good social cohesion, access to technology, which we are so dependent upon. And so just keeping in mind that we need to pay attention to who our stakeholders are and demonstrate to our stakeholders really, really clearly, like maybe more clearly than we think we have to, demonstrate that all of the things the library is doing is making a difference in the community. Finally, this slide has several tools that are available. These have been around for quite a while. So Benchmark is relatively new, and it just got revamped. I think it was just last week that the Public Library Association had a webinar on the new benchmark and the new measurements that they have in mind there. Project Outcome has been around for more than a decade and is still a great tool to use. Impact Survey really focuses on how our community uses the technology in the library. So that's very specific to technology, but it's a really great way of showing how important it is for libraries to provide access to technology. And then the ALA task force on the UN SDGs is the final one that I was speaking about. So I've just thrown a lot at you. And I wanted to make sure that we had time for Q&A. And so I'll ask Sarah if she sees anything, and I'm going to try to bring up this comment piece to see if any messages come up. But I would invite you to ask me anything about what I have thrown at you over the past 40 minutes or so. And I'm happy to go back and take a look at slides and explain further if you'd like.
And feel free to unmute yourself and simply ask it aloud, or you can just put it in the chat. But yeah, we'll give you guys a moment to type.
Kimberly, I had a question, I guess a clarification. It's about being as transparent as possible. You talk about that, and I wondered if you could, or if anyone here could give us an example of how they've done that, because that sometimes is extremely hard. Because I spent years as a public library director reporting to city council, going and doing those annual reports. Some cities will have their departments do that. Some cities have their city administrator or city manager do that on behalf of the departments. It's different in every city. And some of our smaller communities, maybe they don't even feel like they have a voice there. And so any examples of something that we can put into place that would work for a small community?
So I can give an example of, you might be familiar with, there are two cities of Niagara Falls up here near where I live. One is on the US side, just outside of Buffalo, New York, and the other one is in the city of Niagara Falls on the Canadian side. And that city has been growing. It's for the longest time, you know, it was only a couple 100,000 people, which I know is still a large city in the context of Texas. But what's happened is that as that city has grown, it is acquiring big city problems that people in that historically smaller city are really worried about. There's an increase in the number of homeless people, people who are precariously housed. There's a lot of drug use going on in the small downtown that is really makes everyone feel so uncomfortable. There's lots of people who choose to live in smaller centers because they don't want the big city problems, and yet here they are. And I think this is something that's happening in a lot of centers of different sizes. And so it was just a couple of weeks ago that I was in Niagara Falls, and I was with our director, the director of the Niagara Falls Public Library, who on the Canadian side, who was giving a presentation to their council. And one of the questions that came up from one of the councillors was the fact that she had heard from her constituents that they did not feel safe bringing their kids to the library at a branch that was sort of near the downtown, where a lot of drug use was happening. There was some violence that was happening. There was just like a lot of people hanging around because they didn't have anywhere else to go. And the counselor expressed concern about the safety. And what was the library going to do about that? And the counselor really put it on the library. How are you going to fix this? And what the director did very successfully was talk about those challenges in a way that took it away from being the library's problem and encouraged the community to think of it as something that was a challenge for the community and that we can do something about it. So there are ways that we can work with community partners in order to find ways to shelter people. It's getting cold here in Canada. And so people being outside and not having somewhere to shelter was a problem. How can different areas of the city and different groups in the city and different community supports come together to work with the library in order to bring about ways to keep people warm, to give them opportunities to not sleep on the street or, in the courtyard of the library specifically. Find ways to work with local healthcare and public health to find ways to address the drug abuse issues that were happening. And so, Dana, it's not like our director had solutions ready to hand to council, but she was able to reshape the problem as something to work on together across city departments and across community groups, so that no one department or no one part of the community had to feel like it was just their problem to solve. That it was something to be approached as a community and strength in numbers and thinking of each other as neighbors as opposed to strangers. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, that does. I mean, one of the cool things that library directors and those that work in the public library know is they know who the players are. If you've been there long enough, you know who you need to reach out to get help with this or that problem, because you've already faced it at a smaller level, maybe in your library, and to bring that out to like the bigger community to say, oh yeah, these organizations are ones that, can work together or that work on these issues. That's kind of cool to be seen as a resource in that way. And I like your idea of not having to solve it, because I think sometimes we as the library directors, when we're put in that kind of position, feel like, oh my gosh,
we're the fixer.
Problem. Yeah, right.
Yeah, like in library land, we take a lot of pride. We solve problems. We're often really, really good at it. But a lot of these problems, boy, oh boy, they're big. They're really big. And no one group can solve it, only really by working together and sharing the load and sharing ideas about how to approach different ways of trying to solve it, and maybe coming up with ideas we haven't thought of. That was a good question. Thank you. Sarah, I see that there's a question from Mary that I'd like to address.
She asked, how often do you recommend communicating with stakeholders, specifically county elected officials? Concern is overdoing it and becoming a squeaky wheel.
Fair enough. So one of the things that I learned about advocacy from someone who named Wendy Newman, who is a very talented, knowledgeable person when it comes to advocacy, is to develop a relationship with the elected officials that happens outside of council chambers. So inviting elected officials to come visit the library, invite them for events, invite them just to have a tour or look around, Perhaps take them out for coffee to get their ideas and what's happening in their constituency, get their perspective and what they're hearing from the people that they represent. And so it perhaps these formal presentations that happen when we're meeting with our elected officials, like whether it's in council chambers or, this more official communication with annual reports and things like that at budget time, add in lots and lots of informal communication. Invite them in. I cannot tell you how many elected officials I've met who say that they haven't been to the library in over a decade. Gosh, so I'm just like, holy cow. So let's see what we can do about inviting them into our world and adding more informal communication and knowledge sharing. And hey, did you know we're doing this? And did you know the library is doing that? And oh, hey, we're partnering with this group or that group or other libraries. Lots of libraries across more rural areas will do some partnering because they might be sharing similar conditions, even though they're geographically in different places. So hopefully that is some useful ideas.
Yeah, I like that. And Mary says, yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
Or some other questions that y'all might have. I know I was thinking about, we just talked about it yesterday a little bit in my school library program, because oh my gosh, we're talking about assessment and how to assess students and learning and tracking progress and stuff. That's one of the things we were trying to think a little bit in the public library realm of, a lot of times you might not see the same people again. So how do you kind of track that progress?
So one of there's a few different ways that you can do it. I'll use an example. So a few years ago when I was working in a public library, right when the pandemic hit, we used to have a lot of people who were using the library to come together to maybe talk about a book or just catch up. Maybe there was lots of groups that were homeschooling their kids, and so they would often bring the kids to the library. And it wasn't anything particularly formal, but they were just using the library and using the library space. And sometimes there was sort of a formal program, but lots of times it was more informal. And I would sometimes ask if I could just have a couple minutes to talk to one of the parents who or the caregivers who were using the library and tell me about why they were using their library. And it's just a very informal, unstructured way of getting an idea of, why are you choosing to come to the library today? And sometimes I would ask some follow-up questions like, so you came to use the library because there was a particular, book in the collection that you wanted. Maybe it was, about astronomy or something, and you wanted to use that in order to talk to the kids about something. So were you able to find what you were looking for? Are there things that, are there parts of the collection that you wish that you would have had access to? Or do you have ideas for other things that the library could be doing? Should we take advantage? Sometimes there's, if you go to the NASA website, they're already always celebrating one star or another. So is there a way that, those sorts of events could be like wrapped into what you're doing with the homeschooling with your kids? And I'm always interested in just these really informal conversations with our visitors, patrons, if you call them patrons. But when you do that, make notes, write it down. document it, because a lot of these anecdotes and conversations that we have with our visitors are happening all the time, but we're not always remembering to write it down, because, you know, that's data. I mean, it doesn't look like numbers, but when we are collecting stories like that, that is good qualitative data. And these are the sorts of things that help us connect the dots between all of the different activities, the programs, for instance, that are happening in the library, and what's actually happening with the families who are participating. You know, with summer reading, asking how the kids feel about, do they feel more confident in their reading? So many of our summer reading programs are focused on how many pages or how many minutes a child might be reading. Let's ask about how they feel about their confidence in reading. Have they found a series of books that they have fallen in love with? There's nothing better than a kid getting hooked on a book series, right? Where they just want to gobble them up. These stories are the flesh that connect the bones of our quantitative data. And you don't have to put out a formal survey or have a more formal focus group. You can gather some of this qualitative stuff just by asking. And then, of course, you'd always want to make sure that unless the library visitor says it's okay, it's always anonymous. So we're always protecting people's identity and their privacy, of course. But the stories can be really, really valuable.
Great, thank you. That helps.
And I see one from Sandra. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, Sandra asked, what do you do when you get pushback? I have a hotspot program and I had the money to expand, but our county officials did not approve to expand and in fact wanted to cut the program altogether. Despite information I provided, stats, anecdotes, etc., they still want to cut the program. How can you work against that type of pushback?
Well, that's not easy. That's for sure, Sandra. I would recommend trying to figure out why. Why is this pushback happening? What is it about that hotspot program that the county officials feel uncomfortable about? There's something about it that's well, usually fear is usually at the root of these things, but let's not get too weird, metaphysical or anything. But figure out what is it about the program that is motivating the official to not support it and to in fact cut it. If there is, I would imagine that there might be a misunderstanding. Maybe the official is making some assumptions about the program that may not be completely accurate. It goes back to this relationship building, and it can be really, really tough because if you have an official who is trying to sabotage a program that you feel really, really passionate about, that's really irritating. And it's hard not to feel defensive, but try to see if you can reach out to them in a way with empathy and compassion to figure out what the heck is going on there. What is it about that hotspot program that's making them feel uncomfortable? It might actually be something that can easily be explained or solved. But I think that it's sometimes, I know it's my natural inclination to dig my heels in and go, what's your problem? Which is not helpful. So when, in your sane moments, you're like, okay, breathe, try to figure out what it is that's really getting to them about that. That's maybe our ability to understand and our ability to empathize might be what's needed here, and hopefully that works. And Sandra, I hope that was helpful.
Yes, understood. Thank you for the feedback.
Okay, and good luck.
Yeah, good luck with getting
I
that.
would be curious to what's going on there too.
Any other questions that y'all want to ask? We also have another training Kim is presenting for us, I believe next week, actually.
Yes,
Reggie.
ma'am.
Yep. So definitely sign up for that. It's on the plan website. I'll send out another email. You guys know I love to just spam y'all with training emails. This recording too is gonna go out probably in the next couple of days. If we can get it up again on YouTube, that's ideal. If not, I'm just gonna stick it on a Google slide and send y'all the link, as well as oh, I'll put this in here now. This is the link to that post survey, so please fill that out.
Feedback, please.
Yes, definitely. It helps us see where we're at. Also, you guys have places for suggestions on what we can do next time or do better with. So yeah, we're definitely want to hear from y'all.
And any follow-up questions that you might have too.
Yes, that too. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate that. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for being here and joining us. I know y'all are busy.
Maybe I'll see some of you guys next week.
Yes, definitely.